Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. I'm Lisa and I have with me the wonderful Ixchel Lunar today, and we will be talking about decolonizing time. I have seen a workshop of hers on this topic the other day and I found it so interesting. That's why I'm super intrigued that she's here with me today and I can pick her brain. Ixchel, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am always excited to talk about decolonizing and decolonizing time in particular. I am originally from California in the United States, in Northern California, and I was actually the vice mayor of my city in Petaluma for a few years there, and was very active in politics. I ended up letting all of that go in 2016 and decided to move out of the country and move to Matagalpa, Nicaragua, which is where I am currently. And Matagalpa, Nicaragua is up in the highland country. It's a jungle cloud forest. So we're in our wet season right now. It's really green and lush and beautiful. And this week we just celebrated a really famous battle that happened in 1856. The Matagalpa archers were really instrumental in protecting the country from a US incursion. So I was feeling very proud for the people here this week and excited for them because what they did was really essential to stopping an entire region of Central America and the Caribbean and a little bit of South America from becoming a nation that legalized slavery, a single nation. The US had some people that wanted to do that a long time ago. I recently just found out about this organization, secret society that was planning to do all of this, and how the people of the city that I live in, the indigenous people, were vital in stopping all of that. So those are just some of the fun things that I like to write about in my newsletter that I shared this week. And so that's a little bit top of mind and sort of giving a context for where I am and the spirit of the people that live here as well.
Mm-hmm. That's super interesting. I read that newsletter and for people, especially here in Europe, a lot of us don't know a lot about those parts of the world. At least for me, that's true. And it's so cool to find people that explain that part, the richness of the history over there to us. So really appreciate you sharing about it. When we talk about decolonizing time, it may be a good idea to first talk about what colonization actually is. So maybe would you like to briefly sketch the characteristics of colonization for us?
Yeah, colonization, it's sort of the sense that people have is it's, one country goes into another country and sort of takes control and sets up power and government and those kinds of things, but it actually is a little bit more systematic in the process of colonization than sort of the surface layer of what we usually understand colonization to be. And so I like to sort of share it from an easier perspective in that it brings in the indigenous perspective of what colonization is from the experiencer's point of view rather than the colonizer's point of view. And that is that it's a systematic process that seeks to separate people from their land, as well as to set up a number of different separation binaries that have to do with time, space, place, and all of the things that are rooted from those things, so that it causes people to no longer be able to provide for themselves and their kin from the land. They They end up getting separated from their land. In many instances, the separation can be really difficult and violent, as well as in certain circumstances in the past, enslavement was a part of that as well. And so not only losing connection to the land, but then having one's entire life controlled as well. And in some instances, future lives, as in the case of the Catholic Church and their participation in colonization of the Americas. The indigenous people that were enslaved actually owed the church many lifetimes as part of their prescription to work off debt for being alive, which was really fascinating. So it's really this sense of separation. And the flip side of that in terms of the indigenous and the experience is one of deep connection to the land, deep connection to kin, to the relationships that they have. And it's really very much centered in their relationship to the land, to time, to space, to place, and all of the ways of being that kind of come out of that deep embedded and embodied relationship with the world around us.
One for me is like how Native Americans, for example, they live so in relationship to like everything, the rocks, the trees, the rivers, and like really every being or non-being that has their own kind of spirit, right?
Yeah, there's different aspects of what modernity likes to call it animism, and the indigenous think of it in a little bit different of a way, because animism also sort of, there's a little bit of a cleave in there. There's a separation that still exists in the idea of animism, that in the indigenous sense that you get from many different tribes and nations when they talk about their relationship to land, it is one about non-hierarchy, that there isn't a hierarchical experience in that relationship. And so there's an aspect of, whenever we're relating with someone, we hopefully are, connecting with them. And if there's something that we need, there's consent and permission and all of those things. And so part of that aspect of indigenous culture is really about when we're in connection with the land and taking care of our needs and our family's needs, that it's a reciprocal process. There's consent, and there's if it's, for instance, around food, and there's a lot of foraging that happens with the various indigenous cultures. The idea of ensuring that there's always a process of giving back, ensuring that not too much is taken, that things are reseeded when they need to be, planting more seeds from the flora and the fauna. So it's definitely one of relationship, and so something that I really appreciate in the process of decolonizing, is really about that process of reconnection and reestablishing relationship.
Thank you for explaining that. Yeah. And when we talk about colonization being this targeted separation, how does that relate to time?
Yeah, so this is the really fascinating thing that for myself growing up was, there was an intuition that something wasn't right about time while I was growing up. And what I found was that I was very much out of sync with, living in a modern life, living in a downtown sort of, grid streets, lots of cars, lots of activity, and I'm a Generation X. I don't know if that's familiar for all your audience, but in the United States, we have generations. It's about a 20-year time period. And so I was an early Generation X kid, and our generation really grew up with the experience of being latchkey kids, where we sort of had free reign. Nobody had to worry about us being out all hours of the day and into the evening. Things were safer in terms of that aspect, which I say safer with quotes because there's a perception of safety that's actually has nothing to do with it. But that time period, I was really sort of on my own to get myself to school. And because of my challenges with time and the experience of time, what they called temporal perception, I had a real trouble making the bus on time. And so I found that I was having to walk to school quite a bit. And there were other instances where, just the real experience of modernity and modern time and colonial, what I like to call colonial time, which is the 24-hour clock, the 60-minute hour, so it's really much of this, again, separation and division sort of concept of what time is, that I found to be really difficult because my experience of time didn't match that set way of tracking time. And that left me, as I said, feeling very out of sync. And what I came to realize is that as I grew up and really started to understand my culture and the lifestyle that my grandmother, my indigenous grandmother had, I spent quite a bit of time at her house. And that environment really allowed for more of indigenous ways of being, more of a flow of time instead of a very rigid sense of things having to happen at certain times. And the relationships that she had with the people in her neighborhood and all of that really sort of informed a different way than what most of the modern concepts of home and family, in the way that we're separated into houses and needing to have permission to come over, and things are very fancy, and all those sort of ideas of what visiting is like, those kinds of things were sort of just out of the window. And that really informed my sense that I didn't quite fit into this colonial time. And that was really eye-opening for me, and helped to really get a sense that there was a difference, that colonial time was not universal, that it was a construct, right? It was something that was created, albeit hundreds and hundreds of years ago, in terms of the Gregorian calendar and how we mark our days and that sort of thing. But then really starting to understand my own culture, and specifically Mayan culture, which has its own calendar, and it has its own, there are people called daykeepers that over thousands of years, through their observation of the natural world, through the observation of the stars and the planets, which at the time they may not have known as technically as planets, but the sun and the moon and Venus and Mercury, the closer ones that you could see with the unaided eye, they really started to see patterns emerge. And that's how the Mayan calendar was developed, which is a completely different sense of time. They're based in these extremely long epics of 5,500 plus years. And for people that have heard maybe of what the Mayan calendar is, they may have heard something was happening in 2012 and the end of the world and all this sort of stuff that was misinterpreted in terms of what the Mayan calendar was. And that was that there was a new epic that was happening. So there was an end of an epic, but the interpretation began to be this end of time, because that really fits with like the apocalypse and the Bible and, you know, all those sorts of concepts of time. And so unfortunately, there is a bit of a misnomer around what the Mayan calendar is, that there are still day keepers that are tracking time and observing time today, that, you know, in some sense, indigenous people don't live in the past, they live now, they're here, our ancestors are here with us. We don't have that sort of linear experience of time that is really the key component to colonial time. And so indigenous time, and more specifically, what I like to talk about is Mayan time, because that's my family's upbringing and knowledge, is that it's more of a spiral, and it's very patterned, and it's very much in relationship to time itself. In the Mayan calendar, time is an entity. You know, in the same way we talked about that sort of colonial idea of animism, that everything is in relationship, time is a person as well. And so when we think about time and we think about how we talk about time, a lot of times people will say things like, I don't have enough time, or oh, that's a waste of time, or I need more time. But when you think about time as a capital T in relationship, it's really hard to say things like that, because you start to understand that you can't get more of a person, right? You can be more in relationship with a person, but you can't waste a person. And so it's definitely, it's something that I like to try to bring to people's attention when thinking about colonial time versus indigenous or Mayan time, is this sort of distinction about the relationship of time and time as a person. And I think that seems to help people start to think about their relationship with time more, and start to notice how colonization has created that construct for them, and how they can sort of shift their consciousness into thinking about time and looking for ways to be more in relationship with time.
That time has become another commodity that you can buy more of or less of, that you can waste. And like from what I've learned or thought about, it's that's also part of the colonization aspect, that everything becomes a commodity. Our bodies, the earth, everything can be exploited until nothing is left.
Yeah.
But then really nothing is left. And I love how you pointed out that like this indigenous way to approach time is it's cyclic, and that's what I'm practicing or trying to live more, this cyclic way of living according to our own cycles, whatever cycles that are, and that even our personal evolution, it all goes in cycles. Like we do all this round, and then we seem to be at the same point, but we're just on a different level. But we have completed one cycle of evolution, and I found that so cool and so rich. And then like life isn't linear, and you don't go to a goal, but like it's in the process of going around it on and on again.
The cyclic nature of time is really just one of many patterns that the universe is sort of encoded with. If you're familiar with the idea holons, or with fractal nature, that if you sort of keep zooming in on different patterns, you find the pattern just keeps repeating. And it's, you see a lot in plants. Plants are a great sort of way to look at the fractal nature of things. And it's definitely, there's an encoding in the natural world that has a ratio of complexity to it that our nervous systems completely are in tune with. And so when we see those patterns repeated, our nervous system understands that that's part of the natural world, and we actually relax into the space. Whereas when we have patterns that are disjointed with the natural world, our nervous system has this experience of uncertainty and unfamiliarity and need to be alert and that sort of thing. And that is that commodification that you talked about with time, that separation and commodification, the separation from the land and the commodification of our time, the way that we think of our ability to survive in the world as how much we can make per hour, right? That idea of our wage, our labor, and our work, and it's a very sticky concept. It's very difficult to sort of break out of that commodification experience, and so that's sort of a lot of the work of getting back in touch with the cyclical nature of time and being in relationship to our environment, to our place and our time and space is sort of working to let go of those colonial constructs, but also really starting to notice the patterns of the moon and the sun. And if you're familiar with astrology, for instance, or any one of those sorts of patterns that are based on birth date, they're all touching into this fractal nature, that the imprint that we have when we're born, there's an imprint that happens, a fractal imprint of some kind, and that sets up the place that we were born into as the pattern, that when we see that pattern repeat, it's very personal to us in terms of the work that we're here to do, and what we're to understand, and how we're to connect with the earth and the people around us and the relationships that we have. And so, I don't think any one calendar or system of understanding in those ways has all the answers. I think they're all onto something in terms of that ability for us to be able to recognize patterns and to get grounded and relaxed in the cycles, and then also being able to learn from them. I mean, there's so many things that once we start to attune to the patterns in our lives, we can really start to bring to our conscious awareness and work through and sort of almost put to bed sometimes, or at least experience patterns differently when they come back around, when we finally have had awareness about them.
It gave me goosebumps when you said this part about really our nervous system relaxing once it recognizes that we are like all part of it and there are patterns at work. I could feel myself relax immediately.
Yeah.
And I
I love that. Sorry, go ahead.
And so when we, like most of us, like living in the Western world, we have like been in this concept of separation and colonization for most of our lives without probably noticing it much. What can we do? Where can we start to decolonize time or ourselves?
Yeah. And I'm glad that you point out that even though so folks that are living in the Western Hemisphere, for instance, are sort of in this relationship of colonizer, colonized, right? And in the process of continuing or supporting those constructs, or looking for ways to decolonize their situation. But that is the same for the countries where those constructs came from, that those people are also colonized. And it's sort of an awakening that I think that you touched on, that I just want to acknowledge for the folks that maybe from from Europe or from that side of the globe, that you know, their land maybe doesn't seem like it was colonized at any particular point, but their construct of what they're living in is a form of colonization, because it is the thing that keeps them separate from the land as well. And so to be able to start that process of decolonization and shifting our relationship with time, there's a number of things that that can be really helpful. I think that that aspect that I talked about of like really starting to get a sense of where the colonial time has control over our lives, and where we can resist that as much as possible, completely understanding that we all have to work for a living, because we don't have complete access to the land to be able to take care of our needs and that sort of thing. You know, I like to talk about it in terms of a yes and rather than an either or, because we are in a time of transition on the planet, many different types of transitions, climate chaos being, you know, a big part of that experience of transition, and the shift in relationship that all of us are having with the land because of the impacts of climate chaos wherever we are in the world, that no one is going to be safe from that. We've seen that now. And so having that sense that while we, yes, are living within colonial constructs, and we can decolonize, we can restore our relationship with the planet, getting outside, getting, like, you know, what I said about the having that pattern literacy of being able to get a sense of the natural patterns of the universe, they're most evident when we're in natural spaces. And so being able to establish a relationship with, I mean, the easiest thing is if you have some green space nearby, really start to get a deeper sense of what that space is, to get out in that space and to observe throughout the year, to notice how at certain times of the year the sun is rising and setting at different areas within the sky, and how that shifts the light on the land, how that affects the different periods that the natural spaces are in terms of like trees, and how some trees always keep their needles, but maybe they have pine cones, or, you know, some trees lose all of their leaves and they're just very barren and they go into hibernation. The green space can turn from green to brown to flowered, like, you know, just all those types of shifts and changes. And then if there's animal life, to be able to start to notice what kinds of creatures are coming through that space, and, you know, the bird song, and maybe I dislike devices to rely on, but one that I really have been enamored with is bird identification apps and plant identification apps. So like learning what a plant is, what it does, and if it is something that could be beneficial to you, plants are our allies, they're our friends, and we've been in relationship with them for thousands and thousands of years. And then birds are, in so many cultures around the world, birds are a communicatory species. They're telling us information all the time. We're just not always attuned to that information. But a bird could be telling you, hey, there's a snake over there, watch out. Or there's something different that's happening today. I'm going to tell you about it. Or, oh my gosh, these seeds have bloomed and I'm so excited, I'm going to eat them. And, you know, there's just all kinds of things that that are happening in terms of those communication aspects of the world around us. And so when we start to pay attention and start to witness those patterns and get a sense of them over years, then we develop a really deep sense of pattern literacy, so that as the earth is transitioning, we can start to see actually what is being impacted around us. Because those are warning signals. And a lot of folks have missed the warning signals of climate chaos because they weren't paying attention. And so there's been more of this sort of, we have to educate people and convince people that this is happening. But the actuality is if people really just get a sense of their environment and pay attention and be in relationship, people will start to understand that things are happening, and that they can participate in you know, staying in relationship to where they are in a particular space. So I really like to sort of keep it hyper local because it's the easiest thing for people to do. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and everybody is very busy, and you know, our lives are very full in terms of being able to get by in the world. And so this aspect of like, it's twofold. It's taking a rest and observing and deepening the relationship with our place. It's just a super easy way to get reconnected with those cycles.
It's beautiful. And like one cycle in particular that I am very attached to is like the lunar cycle, obviously, the moon, which is also very easy to like observe in the night sky. And now I know, if I'm not much mistaken, that both your first and last name relate to the moon. If you would like to explain just briefly a little bit about it, because I find it so wonderful.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's very fascinating. So Ixchel is sort of a multifaceted person that in Mayan cosmology in particular was someone that oversaw birth and midwifery and the moon cycle, and was very connected to rabbits and snakes and things that sort of really depict the cycles of birth, life, and death. And so, you know, another colonial sort of demarcation is this separation of life and death. And in many indigenous cultures, there is no separation between life and death. It's all part of a continuous thing that's completely ongoing. And which is why we say the ancestors are with us. They're not in a past. They're here today. And so I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that additional sort of concept that is part of my name and why I was given that name. And then Lunar is a family name, and it's the particular nation that my indigenous ancestors are from, hails from what we now know as the Incan region of what is the high Andes in Peru, Brazil. It's sort of a triangular area of space that's separated by countries at this point. But these people, these ancestors of mine, at one point left that region like 2,500 years ago to 2,000 years ago. So a really long time ago, before even the Machu Picchu, which is a pretty well-known ancient ruin that is part of the Andes. They left before that, and they slowly migrated their way up through Panama and Costa Rica and into through Nicaragua and Guatemala and into Mexico. And eventually they ended up residing in Mexico, in Michoacan. And their connection, one of their origin stories is deeply connected to the relationship of the sun and the moon. And so, and this is true for a lot of indigenous people. The sun and the moon are very important aspects because they help to keep track of the cycles and help people to know when to plant and when to harvest and all of that, to really be in relationship with the land. And so there are many people that will have the last name Solar or Lunar. And it seems to be a deeper connection to their ancestral lineages and the relationship that the sun and the moon had with each other. And in particular, the Purepecha have a really beautiful origin story that has to do with the moon sort of reclaiming her place in the sky. And so I just love that.
Thank you for sharing that as well. I could listen to you for hours and hours on end, I think.
I could probably go for hours.
We'll meet another time.
Yeah.
And would you like to tell people how they can find you or how they can contact you if they are interested in learning more?
Yeah, so I am available on Instagram a little bit. I try to, I'm lessening my social media, just to be honest, because devices have a little bit of a dopamine control over us that I'm trying to reduce in my life. And so I do like to share interesting things on my Instagram stories. So that's probably a place that you would find me very active, because I do really like to share other people's information and who they are and get people connected. I love connecting people. So that's really fun. So that is ixchel.love. And then that's also my website, ixchel.love. And on my website, you can find out about the Decolonizing Time mini course if you want to go further into what that's about. I also talk about and train people how to get into flow states, which are part of that sort of indigenous way of being that's very much connected with the world around us and brings a real deep sense of focus and attention to whatever it is that we're doing that creates tons of happy chemicals that makes us feel delightful, because that's our birthright, is to feel joy and to feel pleasure and to rest. And so there's information about that workshop that I did, and there's a mini course that has a handbook that's very useful. And then additionally, people just want to subscribe. They can subscribe to the Dragon Letters, which is my newsletter. And I'm always sharing different aspects of decolonization within that newsletter. It's a long newsletter, so I like to sort of warn people that if you don't like long newsletters, you probably wouldn't enjoy it. But it's great for going down rabbit holes and learning new things. So I'll just say that. And then
I definitely enjoy long. I love it.
And some people don't, and that's okay. You know, they don't have time. That's where people are. But yeah, and then I also have a retreat. And so depending upon when you're seeing this particular video, there are, I'm planning to do monthly retreats to make them available very regularly. And that will basically be a week of learning how to slow down. We call it a rest revolt, because rest is resistance. especially to the colonial notions of time. And we go through a detox, a digital detox, which actually really helps us to get more in touch with our senses so that we can deepen our relationships with the world around us more quickly. The technological way of living does very much desensitize us. And so that's part of that process. And then from there, I take people through a 4-hour deep immersion into really getting people connected with their curiosity and learning how to be in flow more regularly, and creating space within their own calendar for rest and joy and pleasure and flow and all of that, which are all decolonizing practices.
We link all of that in the show notes of this video. And
wonderful, thank you.
Sounds so good. Thank you, dear Ixchel, for being here with me. And
thank you,
I
Lisa.
hope to see you again and talk to you again.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too. Bye.
Bye.